know, it's really happy holidays, happy new year. You know, we have a fantastic show planned today to talk about a review of the most important foreign policy stories that you may have missed, which will have a looming impact on the administration of Donald Trump. But you know, I want to say this because I know people watch the beginning of this show and sort of taper off a little at the end. I could not ask for a better professional team than the National Desk and their production crew, Greg Massani, Aaron Brock, Aideen King. I mean, we have the best people assembled here at the National Desk, WJLA 24/7, and I'm just blessed. You know, while I'm on camera, you don't always see the great team behind the scenes. So I just want to give a shout out to the best people I enjoy working with. No drama, no pettiness. Let's just get it done and get out of here. Thank you for a first-class team. I just want to say that at the beginning, because the Bible says if you find something good in someone or something, give credit. I just gave that. What's happening, Sam Faddis? My man, Sam Faddis, what's happening?
Merry Christmas, Armstrong. Great to be here.
You know, I so appreciate, because I know so many people want to have you in their house, because you are the man. But you always say yes to Aaron when he booked you for the show. I want you to know we do not take that for granted. Okay?
I thought you were going to tell me I look like Santa Claus for a minute.
Santa Claus wish he did have your looks, okay? He'd have all the women in the world. They'll be banging at his feet and knocking down his door.
You're going to get me in trouble with my wife real fast.
Oh, no, she's secure. She knows you're a fat man of family values. You just don't talk it, you live it. My man, John Keys, Mr. Operative, we never give his name. He's always in the dark. What's happening, Mr. Operative?
It's good to be here. Merry Christmas to you as well.
And you know, and we don't sound down in the dumps like it's the end of the world, don't know where the next meal is coming from. You know, sometimes you need to show joy for what the Lord continues to give us, not because of, but in spite of it. And a new addition to this foreign team. What's happening, Ryan Macbeth? Oh, that's the problem. Can't hear him. No, y'all got to work on him. But let me get back to my A team. So let's move this thing up. You know, let's move this up so I can get rolling here. Okay, here we go. So look, the public trust. No, not the wrong way. Just come to the beginning. Okay, very good. We got to get audio working for Ryan McDev. But let me talk about how we want to start this. We want to capture the stories in foreign policy that you may have missed. Okay, one thing I really want to start with is that the public trust in our intelligence and federal law enforcement institution has been so ruptured, and this must be addressed quickly. And we are crippled internally, and people just don't talk about that enough. Let me start with you, Mr. Operative, to talk about how we have been ruptured.
Yeah, Armstrong, one of the most important aspects of the effectiveness that affects our ability to perform our work is the public support. I mean, people send their tax money to Washington and they expect results, and they expect us to be working 24/7 to ensure that we don't have another 9/11. And when that trust is ruptured, which is where it is now, there is no trust in anything related that I've seen, certainly in the intelligence community. That has to be repaired. And the only way to repair it is to disassemble the system that you have now and rebuild something that will work, and the public will trust that you're doing your job, not any extracurricular activities or taskings that are politically related.
Let me switch to my iPhone.
Sam Faddis, let me mention this to you. There are just a myriad of important energy, national security issues, and active conflicts in areas of the world that capture attention and demand action. The President of the United States is arriving in Washington, D.C. on January 20th. What will he face on January 20th with a huge problem set because of what the current administration has failed to address over the last 4 years?
He's going to face a whole series of things that are in free fall, and that may be too generous, because this administration is not just incompetent. This administration is
6, 7,
actually
8.
actively setting fires around the world. So right now we have a crisis in Ukraine. We have no idea how bad that's going to be when Donald Trump sits down. The Russians are threatening to use nuclear weapons all the time. That's not an idle threat. That conflict continues to spiral out of control. It's not static. The Chinese just conducted the biggest drills they ever have with naval ships and aircraft off Taiwan. They're about 5 seconds away from imposing a blockade on Taiwan, and that action alone will crash the world economy. Again, not hyperbole. Situation in the Middle East is escalating because it is all sorts of ripple effects are coming off of our failed policy. So Syria just fell, if you will, and Assad is gone, and he was a monster, and that's good riddance. But he was replaced by what amounts to Al-Qaeda. So we have a brand new caliphate in Syria, and those guys are already beginning to wage war on the Kurds. I mean, there are just a whole series of crises like this around the world where things are spiraling out of control. And the crazy part to me of this is that the Biden administration looks at all of this and all they do is step on the gas more. They don't change course. They don't back off. They just throw good money after bad and make it worse by the day.
You know, Ryan McBev, our adversaries have discovered that watching the United States flail about globally and internally, that's a program of subversion, economic attacks, aggressive and well-delivered propaganda, and active measures in the economic and trading spaces. And I think what they believe is this, is that the United States can be defeated.
That's a very good point. It kind of depends on what you mean by defeated. If you mean by defeated militarily, I think that is very, very unlikely. But can it be defeated within by convincing blue-haired idiots to glue themselves to Navy ships, or for people to protest outside the White House saying Taiwan has always been part of the current Chinese regime? Then yeah, we can be defeated before we even fire a shot.
You know, Mr. Operative, our most powerful tool and weapon is the size, scale, and depth of our economic, manufacturing, and energy production system. An attack on our currency, which we're seeing, an economic sector, coupled to internal division in our government and lack of unity within our population, is continuing to bear fruit, no matter how much it appears that most people were at peace with the results of the presidential election on November 5th. Our enemies have still found a path to cripple and defeat us. And my question to you, is it working?
Marcia, there is ample evidence that their policy and their strategy is bearing fruit. We remain a largely divided population domestically. There's all kinds of noise from every fringe sector on both ends of the spectrum. And our economic situation inside the country with inflation, price of fuel, price of food, is aggravating the situation. I think what has happened is watching us over the last 20 years expend unbelievable amounts of blood and treasure in two major conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then essentially losing both places. That has demonstrated that and it's not the military's fault, it's the leadership fault. We have the greatest fighting force ever assembled in human history, and we have it led by some of the worst command figures that I have seen in the arc of my professional career. And these are people I wouldn't follow in a fire drill. And yet they're leading combat units, and they're trying to be political generals as well as combat generals. And that doesn't work. And here we are 20 years in plus, and we have lost both conflicts and given the country back to the Taliban, which we went there to destroy. And Iraq remains in disarray as a surrogate money machine for Iran. And it's now the country next door, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. We talked about this before we even began after 9/11, are inexplicably connected together. And if you pull one of those countries out of the wall, you weaken the wall if you don't have a three-country concept on what you want an outcome to look like. Now we're dealing with all three separate pieces, and they're all a mess.
So Sam Faddis, let's call the names that everyone in the world are familiar with. Ukraine, China, Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, and Cuba all require national attention from intelligence and domestic security angles. And the lack of border controls on our two vast land borders has enabled our enemies to bypass the legal gateway system for entering America. They simply just walk in. The drug and human trafficking networks can move spies and paramilitary operations into the country with ease. How critical is it for Donald Trump to change this immediately?
He has to change all of that immediately, but to grab a hold of the last thing you're talking about, you can't have an open border and actually it's worse than an open border because we're actively facilitating people crossing the border. You can't have that and then seriously discuss anything else about domestic security. I mean, it's kind of like all the doors and the windows are open in your house and you leave them unlocked at all hours of the day, and then you want to ask a security consultant, how do I control access to my house? They're like, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to close the windows and the doors, buddy. Then we can move on to alarms and cameras and everything else. Right now, you've got millions and millions and millions of people who are just average folks who managed to find their way quite easily into this country, and people moved drugs into this country on an industrial scale. So as a matter of common sense, you want to tell me what Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or anybody else, the communist Chinese, could do? The answer is anything you could possibly imagine. As I've said to you before, I mean, a nuclear weapon these days that goes in a cruise missile will fit in the trunk of a subcompact car. You know, it's a couple of 100 pounds. So Hezbollah, anybody could put anything on our soil, and we're not making any attempt to stop it. So if they're not actively killing people and blowing things up, it's just because they haven't decided to, not because we're stopping any.
You know, Ryan Macbeth, I noticed you're shaking your head, and while I know you want to comment on that, what are the key steps must the United States take to rebuild trust also with its traditional allies, especially in the wake of the recent geopolitical shifts?
You know, I got to tell you, Armstrong, if you think it's hard being an enemy of the United States, wait until you're an ally. We have broken a lot of trust with our allies over the past couple of years, you know, to start Ukraine. And one of the things we told Ukraine was, hey, give up those nuclear weapons back to Russia, and we'll make sure you're protected. And when Ukraine called on us to help, we kind of gave them ammunition in drips and drabs, just keeping them alive long enough to slow Russia down. And that's certainly an issue. I'm also worried about Syria. We need to take a look at our relationship with the Kurds, because if we abandon the Kurds right now, what will any other allies say about us in the future? If we take a look at the new government that's forming in Syria and say, yeah, you know what, the Kurds aren't our problem. By the way, thanks for helping us fight ISIS. So we need to reestablish our commitment on the world stage as the world power that we truly are.
We're going to take a break and come back with our distinguished foreign policy experts. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away. Welcome back with our distinguished guests. Sam, how have the withdrawal from Afghanistan and other recent foreign policy decisions impacted the U.S.'s reputation globally, and what is necessary to repair that damage?
Well, it's the damage from Afghanistan and things like that is catastrophic, right? I mean, we talk about allies, and allies are crucial because we cannot be on our own. Well, I mean, look, we live in a bad neighborhood and there really are monsters out there and enemies, and you're either reliable and you show up and people can stand with you and have be confident in you or not. So you don't walk away from 20 years of conflict and then sort of pretend like nothing happened and allow the creation of a brand new terrorist superstate and then think that the next day you can talk to people and have any credibility. I mean, both Mr. Keyes and I have been in the business of sitting there talking to people to bring this down to, an intelligence perspective. You're trying to get them to trust you, risk their lives, go into hostile territory for you. And they're looking at you like, are you kidding me right now? Because like you guys cut and run every other day and abandon your allies to the wolves. So there is a massive cumulative effect to that. We should not take for granted that we are the world's preeminent power. That's not just like a law of physics. We earned that and we're busy squandering it.
Mr. Operative, I've also, as a media owner throughout our platforms, agonized with this issue. Do you think economic sanctions still are an effective tool for U.S. foreign policy, or have adversaries adapted to undermine their impact? Mr.
Armstrong, the situation with financial sanctions related to the U.S. dollar, it was a tool that had a window of time where it could be effective if it was used very selectively and surgically. That time has long passed. There are ways around the U.S. sanctions today, and the best example I can give you is the oil embargo against the Russians. It simply does not work. You can trade commodities in other currencies. We can't follow the dollars in the energy sector because it's too complicated. The Russians own the pipeline in Iraq that goes from Kurdistan all the way to Basra. They also have strategic relationships in Turkey at 3 different loading piers and tanker bunker areas at 3 piers. The blending of their oil takes place in the pipeline that they own, and they blend the oil and sell it on the international market. And they trade in multiple currencies, and we don't have windows into the banking sector, and we cannot affect foreign currencies. It's a feckless mess. We apply a tool that doesn't work and then claim we're doing something. That is a failed policy that no longer helps the United States. And it makes everyone angry when you mess with their money.
So, Ryan, is there a better way to make U.S. sanctions more effective with their military strategy? And in what ways has the rise of China and Russia influenced the global effectiveness of U.S. sanctions and military posturing?
Well, it does seem like sanctions have had a harder time taking hold. I mean, they might trip the ability of a country to respond in the short term. For example, taking Russia out of the SWIFT banking system, that had genuine effects. But today, with like some of your other guests said, the rise of exchange of commodities or even electronic currencies like Bitcoin, that can be a bit of an issue because money can flow across states electronically very easily. Now, as for backing up these sanctions, I mean, what are the United States core competencies? We are very good at bombing people. And that is one thing that we seem to have taken off the table. I recall when Muammar Gaddafi blew up a West German nightclub and killed 3 American soldiers, we responded by attacking his country. And after that, he shut up for a good 20 years or so. So perhaps there needs to be kinetic effects along with sanctions that let people know, maybe this isn't the route you need to take. Get back onto the world stage and negotiate in good faith, because we can back up our words with actual deeds.
One of the things I enjoy reading is Sam Faddis's A&D magazine. And I was just shocked at a recent article by him. And the question he raised, why are pallets of American US dollars showing up in Damascus? Why, Sam?
Well, it remains an open question. The current state of our looking into this indicates that the pallets appear to have been in somebody else's hands before they ended up in Damascus, by which I mean the dollars do not appear to be stacked on the pallets in the configuration that they actually come from the Federal Reserve. So that doesn't mean it's not real money. It means it's real money and it's still banded, but it's been in somebody else's hands between the Federal Reserve in New York and ending up in Damascus. And this business about rigging it with an incendiary device that we talked about also appears to be something that is done by people other than the United States after it leaves our hands. What's my current guess? Came through Iran to end up in Damascus. That's an educated guess at this point, but there's been a lot of, well, I was going to say reporting. We know that there's been a lot of money that's come from the U.S. government into Iranian hands for a whole variety of reasons. So if you follow that, it doesn't matter who the middleman was. It means that we have, one way or the other, provided millions of dollars that ended up in Assad's hands in Damascus.
But you also feel as though that we're flying blind in our intelligence, and there's another dismal failure in Syria.
Yeah, look, and Mr. Keyes and I have discussed this at length recently. I don't want to get into exact numbers, but we know from talking to folks inside that the operational pace inside the Central Intelligence Agency is an example. Again, I'm not going to talk exact numbers of officers and assets, but they are running in the agency almost no sources and collecting almost no intelligence. The operational pace compared to what it was when Mr. Keyes and I were active is, I don't know, 10%, less than 10%. They're moving at a snail's pace. They're collecting almost no intelligence. So look, Syria just collapsed and Assad was thrown out, and nobody saw that coming, and nobody warned Washington. That despite the fact, by the way, that we have 800, 900 guys on the ground inside of Syria, and we have collection capability all around it. And still we were completely blindsided. So if you take that and then think about that in the context of all the other things we've touched on, what's the likelihood we're going to know that the Chinese are about to impose a blockade, or the Iranians are about to go nuclear, or any of these other things going to happen? And I would say virtually nil. We're going to have no warning.
You know, Mr. Operative, so many things have changed this year in terms of the gravitas that Iran once had, the killing of Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, the weakening of Iran's influence and military might, the collapse of Syria, which was a stronghold not only for the Russians, but also for the Iranians. How much have this toll has taken, and how much does it present an opportunity not only for the United States, but Israel?
The disarray that we see across the region is extremely dangerous for the neighbors that live out there, as well as those that are our allies that rely on us to play a constructive role. And all of this has come to a pinpoint when we are at our worst possible calendar structure in the middle of a presidential change of power. We're at the final 5 weeks before we have an inauguration of a new team, and historically decision-making and anything that has any possible risk outside of the United States is just put on ice. We are frozen in time. The world is not frozen in time, and it is moving aggressively, and people see opportunity for open field running, and they're seizing it. And we're seeing that in every sector. It's almost a global issue now where communications and connections are there. Our borders are open. Our economy is weak. Our intelligence system is parked on the shoulder of the road, and everything is happening around us, and we are in the sort of the right field bleachers in the $2 seats with binoculars trying to figure out what's going on. It's just an absurd, dangerous time historically. I've experienced several presidential changes in my lifetime in the professional side of the house, and I have never seen the disarray, lack of attention, and the lack of effort and performance in the human sector like I see today. I'm out in the Middle East constantly. I have not stumbled onto a case officer in the last 8 years, but I have seen operations people from other nations that I know from years past on the ground doing their thing, especially people like the British. The British don't have a lot of people, but they have good people that know what they're doing. The Israelis know what they're doing, and they take risk. The U.S. is parked in these little outposts that we construct around the globe, and unless you leave the compound, you're not going to have any contact with the locals. And that's why people talk to people like me and Sam. They can reach us, they remember us, they trust us, and they call in. And I ask constantly about questions like the money. It's like, how did these guys get this? And why haven't you reached out to the official system? And their answer was, well, we don't talk to them. I'm not going to a FOB to see anybody. And I'm certainly not going to go to the embassy in Baghdad. We packed up and left Syria years ago. We had one of our best ambassadors there that spoke Arabic, excellent Arabic, Ambassador Ford. We closed the embassy and left. We haven't had any coverage in Damascus for a number of years. And they talk about these things that we talk about the risk factors. The Syrians have historically manufactured the best chemical warfare agents of any country outside of the Western world. They have real scientists, they have real laboratories, and they know what they're doing. And they packed up and bugged out and left all of that stuff is there. Sam mentioned that you can carry a nuclear weapon in the trunk of a Toyota Corolla. You can do the same thing with a sarin, 155 millimeter sarin round. It's not hard to transport weapons of mass destruction today because the size is no longer prohibitive, and the weight is no longer prohibitive. You can put it in the trunk of a Toyota taxi and drive across an international border with a WMD device in the vehicle.
You know, all this is so humbling to hear, and just you ask yourself, how did we get here, and how do we get away from it? You know, Ryan, you have the last word.
Boy, that's a heck of a word. When you take a look at the Syrians, you're absolutely correct. They have not only manufactured chemical weapons, they've actually used chemical weapons on their own people. So that is a concern. I believe that Israel tried bombing some of their chemical weapons sites to at least try to reduce the amount of available chemicals that would be in the hands of any rebels, should those rebels decide to turn on the West or sell some of those chemicals to the West. Although that could mean the end of Syria if they ever actually use them against people in the West. We are in a very dangerous time right now, and we have about 6 weeks until President Trump comes into office. The good thing is that President Trump has already shown that he is able to influence policy without even being in office. There are nations that are already going, you know what, there's a new sheriff in town and we're going to have to abide by his rules. And fingers crossed, nothing happens between now and January 20th, I believe, when President Trump can actually get into office and wield some real power.
Ryan, Mr. Operative, Sam, thank you all for joining us. Best for the holidays and the new year. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back.
Thanks, Armstrong.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. You know, there are just stories that you're just not going to hear in the mainstream press among my colleagues on the left. And sometimes you're just not going to hear the stories on other platforms. But you know, what we do here on this show is that we bring stories that are important, that are significant, where it shows that people, no matter whether they consider themselves to be lifelong Republicans or Democrats or independents, sometimes when they look at the reality of their communities, when they look at the reality of the place they care about most, and they said, you know what, I'm fed up, I cannot take this no more. I'm not switching because you're a Democrat or Republican. I'm switching because we need to bring in programs and policies that work for the people in these neighborhoods. And Chicago is a classic example. I've got my dear friend, Marcia Dyson, who always brings us some of the best guests to this platform. And today is no different. You know, she runs the Women's Global Institute, which is a trade bureau. But our guest today is Patricia Rae Easley. Now, she's the founder of Chicago Red. I bet you're wondering, what is Chicago Red? And she's the hostess of Black Excellence Hour. You know, before I even hear from Miss Easley, I want you to put her story in perspective for us, Marcia.
Well, being a Chicagoan and a social activist for decades, you know, I always worked with many politicians, but one thing that was important to me was really what was good for the citizenry of all of Chicago. My job as public information officer of the city of Chicago at the time, too, was to show Chicago the world by the lake, 87 distinct ethnic communities, and the Chicago for all. But what I think that we're seeing with Miss Easley is that she realized that one of those distinct ethnic communities was put behind the 8 ball in the last few years, and that she's been advocating for. So it wasn't a matter about her politics alone. I think of really what we're listening to when we hear from her, and what we listen to, regardless of what people think about the results of the past election, is the despair that a lot of people have that their politics or their political party won't dictate their needs, because when they come and sit at the table, you're not sitting with a politician, you're sitting with your family. When you walk in the streets and you want safety, you're not walking with politicians who might have security while they say we shouldn't have guns. You're not walking into schools where the children are being undereducated or educated wrongly, or their politicians are not there when they're at the pump or when they're at the grocery store checking out. Armstrong, I spent $67 last week and got eggs, milk, some tart cherry juice, and about 5 other items or less, and spent $67. And I'm concerned, how are people making it? So when Chicago, the city is known during St. Patrick's Day, where the river grows turn green, everybody is Irish that day. But there's something very special, and something I think that Patricia can tell the Democrats especially what is wrong in Chicago and why they turn the river and the city red.
So, Ms. Rae, thank you so much for joining us, and I love the hat. What is it that inspired you to create Chicago Red? You literally turned Chicago red for Donald Trump.
Yes, sir. So firstly, I go by P. Rae. And the reason that I go by P. Rae is because I'm named after both of my parents, Patricia and Rae. And Patricia does not want her name associated with this at all. So my apologies to Dr. Pat. However, I've grown up in this city my entire life. I'm a fourth generation Chicagoan. My great grandmother left the great state of Mississippi in the 1940s, and then she came here, and then her children came here, and here I am. My parents met in the Chicago Public Schools in the 7th grade in 1969. When they graduated from college, they moved back to the neighborhood where both of my grandmothers lived. So I've always lived in the neighborhood with both of my grandmothers, all of my uncles, aunties, cousins, my grandmother's sisters, their children. So the Austin community on the West Side is my village. My parents were very intentional about reinvesting their social and political capital back into the community. And so I've grown up political my whole life. But after a while, I got tired of the trauma bonding and pity parties, and I said, y'all, it's time to move on.
So what did you move on to?
I moved on to MAGA. So the way that I got wrapped into the MAGA movement is actually through my desire to do advocacy for the city of Chicago. In 2016, I moved out of the country to go into a self-imposed political exile to protest Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel. When I repatriated, when Donald Trump came into office, I happened to be on a blog in the middle of the night, and they said that they were hosting a Sunken Place Poem Festival. And I'm like, what is a Sunken Place Poem Festival? So I clicked it, and I saw Ben Carson's picture. He was going to be at the Young Black Leadership Summit that was going to be held in Gaithersburg, Maryland. I said, okay, whatever this is, I need to try to go because I need to get an audience with Dr. Carson because they're demolishing the housing stock in my community while the Chicago Housing Authority is hoarding over $1 billion of federal housing money. So I applied to go. 3 days later, I got an email that said, the President of the United States requests your presence in the East Room, please RSVP. I went to RSVP for the event and got red-pilled by the sitting President of the United States of America in the White House. He told us, African Americans, you built this country. This is your country. The Democrats are putting everybody ahead of you and treating you all like your guests as if this is not your land. Everything from sea to shining sea is for you and you first. So we were in the White House literally screaming, we free, we free. And he was like, yes, you are. And to be a descendant of a freedman in the White House screaming that with other freedmen is an experience like none other. So I brought that energy back to my city and I pushed it out via my radio show, via Black Chicago for Trump, and now we're doing Chicago Red.
You know, it's one thing to sit and talk with the President of the United States, and a lot of that's political because you embrace a lot of his philosophy and his agenda. And someone could say, well, you know, she's just a useful tool. But obviously, they cannot say that because when you went back to Chicago, there was something about your message that resonated with so many people that felt the same way you felt, but did not have your platform, did not have your chutzpah, and the guts to just say, I'm just not going to sit around. I'm not going to be on nobody's plantation. I'm not going to be exploited any longer. We got to deliver for everyday people who are not being a part of this economic boom, not a part of this elite class. And so, obviously, so many people resonated with you. How did you spread that message and inspire these people to believe that there is something better for them in terms of how they vote and how they vote in the political process?
Our movement is a self-esteem movement. That's the tagline of my show is that this is a show for people with high self-esteem. So if you put that out there, even the people who don't necessarily like right-wing radio are going to listen because they're going to say, wait a minute, I have high self-esteem. Let me listen to what this woman is saying. And my message is a message of lineage, of birthright, and American patriotism. We are not telling people about the socioeconomic measures or platform of the Republican Party. What we're saying is that we don't know anything about the white Republican boogeyman in the city of Chicago. All of the villains of our story are fellow Negroes who happen to be a part of the Democratic Party. And so for that reason, if you love yourself, it's time to move on. Our grandparents told us way too many sad cotton chopping stories about leaving the South and coming up here to stand on their feet in factories to literally leave us properties to live in. That was their whole goal when they left the South, to build something for their children and their grandchildren. And I say to them, do you think your grandmother stood on her feet and built the property base of the city of Chicago to give it to illegals? Is that all you want? Are you okay with an open border that has attracted the cartel here, that has turned our neighborhoods into narco towns, and we have people passing away of fentanyl? Why are you using your political capital for that? Why are you allowing them to call you Black and people of color and minorities, and so that they can utilize our American Negro privilege or our American Negro political capital to advance the immigrants when we ourselves are not immigrants? Don't you love yourself? Who raised you to hate yourself like this? And once you say it to the people like that, they're like, oh, I get it. My conversation is not the typical right-wing conversation. You know, typically we talk about family structure. And I understand that our goal is mother, father, married with children. However, if we are a pro-life organization or a pro-life political party, then we have to value, sorry about that.
Just take care of that. I'm gonna take a break and come back and let you take care of that. I'm Armstrong Williams. Wow, fascinating, right? Don't go away. We'll be back.
Wow.
Yeah, that's good.
It was it.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know what's fascinating, I want to come back to you, is how Black activism has been undermined, how it's been polluted, how it doesn't really work for everyday people. It works for the elite. They are no different than the establishment that voted for Trump against people who have this common ground, stay in power, give more welfare and social programs to the poor, continue to break up the family, continue to bring these migrants in, take away jobs, continue to take fathers out of their children's lives, take them out of the classroom where they can make a difference on the school ground with discipline and teaching them self-respect and self-discipline. Your story is not one of some right-wing political party. Yours is just common sense. People want a better life.
And we deserve it, sir. We're not guests in this country. We deserve to be here. We're not asking for a favor. We're talking about what we are absolutely entitled to as American citizens. And again, this is why it's working. We're reminding the people that your people are buried deep, flesh and bone in this country. We fought in every single war. We helped them beat the British, pitch the French, kick the Spaniards, push the natives off the land. Every time America needed some help, the American Negro showed up with, 10 toes down. And so now it's time for us to take a full advantage of our country. We're no longer going to pity party and trauma bond with each other and talk about, oh, they think that we're 3/5 a person. No, they don't. Nobody thinks that you're 3/5 of anything. You are a full American. We are as American as sweet potato pie, people, not apple pie. Sweet potato pie is our pie, and we are American people.
Let me ask you, how do you take what is absolutely common sense and what is absolutely necessary to make it a reality for the people who see you as a leader, as a voice, and as a movement to change the reality of their circumstances? Because if it doesn't change, then you will lose them. You got to give them something other than just hope, while hope matters.
Correct.
In terms of policy, how do you change the policies, the thinking, and how they are treated in terms of housing, the migrants, jobs, and most important, the crime. The crime is just overwhelming.
You got to remind them that they're citizens, sir. You have to tell them that you are not a person of color, that our issue is not a migrant. Yes, it is. We are migrants. Our grandparents were the migrants of this country. That's why it's called the Great Migration, and it happened twice. But they are using all of our social, political, and historical capital to advance the immigrant against us. And we're telling people, you're not an immigrant, you're a citizen. Act like you're a citizen. Your people died for this land. Don't you love yourself? I know you love yourself. We are a movement of love because love compels you to action. That's it. That's the only thing that we're doing. We're not making promises to people. We're not reading down political agendas. We're telling people, open your eyes and realize that the emperor does not have on any clothes, and we're looking at a big old ashy back. It is time to move on, people, and everybody's moving on. And the beauty of this is because the Republican Party is really not formed well in the city of Chicago, we can create this to be whatever we want it to be, that's going to be oppositional of the policies that we've been getting generationally that have kept us in the same space that we're in. We're tired, sir.
You know, Marcia,
Yes.
and I know this is an emotional issue for you because I know you believe in Black activism, but I think more than anything else in this last presidential election, it has been so undermined.
It has been undermined, and that's the most painful thing. When you have Black women being the grand marshals for the last campaign and having even the slogan that we win with Black women, and to see the failure of this administration, even to support them sometimes financially in that endeavor, that is painful for me. But one thing I like about P. Rae is that we can no longer situate it under color itself anymore. You know, it's almost as race itself has been undermined, and so to continue using that as the uplifter rather than our humanity, as I think is where we subtract ourselves out of this multiplication of what can happen in this administration. When I'm across the waters, when I'm traveling internationally, they don't call me Black American, they don't call me African American, they let me know you are American.
That's
and
true.
It's always a rude awakening. You know, it's like, wait a minute, I'm waiting for the adjective before this American, but they say that you are American, which means I come with American ideologies, which often, and on the continent of Africa, they check me on that because I'm not African, right? And I don't have that.
And they don't believe you have their traditions.
They don't. I'm learning those traditions. Yeah. We can romanticize Africa all we want to, but when you go there, you're not African. You may have the pigmentation of some of the Africans, but you're not African. You are American, and I do embrace, you know, my country, the United States of America. But when it comes to Black activism, as we had saw it and how it ended with this particular election, I am concerned. If we don't go to the White House like we didn't do 4 years when President Trump was in office, then that depowers us, right? And people say, well, Marcia, you act like you all for Trump, or Marcia, you act like, you know, you done changed all right wing. I said, no, I'm of the common sense party more than anything. And I'd say this to people. I want to take the spirit of Dr. Dorothy Height. Why Dr. Dorothy Height? Well, Dr. Dorothy Height met with President Armstrong from Eisenhower, I believe, all the way down to Obama. And she went into every administration that she could to exert power for the African community then, the Negro community then, the Black community now, that she could. And I'm going with that spirit. I'm not talking from the corner anymore. We need to go into the belly of the beast if that's what you think it is. But I see it as my right, as P. Rae has said, this is my country. I'm going to go and talk to the person in power of the country. Why should I talk to an underling? Why should I rumble on the streets? Real soldiers, real warriors, real people who are concerned about their concern for their community, and for me, America in general. You go to the symbol of power. The same thing, okay, let me take it further. I'm of Harriet Tubman's. Why Harriet Tubman? Well, Harriet Tubman was a scout and a spy for the Union Army. Do you think that the Union Army cared if this Black woman was actually murdered during her service for the Union Army while she was still trying to liberate slaves? She was a free slave trying to work for the Union Army, which was an enemy to her people. She was liberating while she's fighting their enemy, which was the South.
Hold
right.
Okay. P. Rae, do you have any ambition to run for office, to develop candidates for office? Because I would assume that would be a next progression.
Yes, sir. So I was raised in my U.S. Congressman's office. Again, every day after school, I went to Congressman Danny Davis's office. I was groomed as the heir apparent. However, there's a running joke amongst the politicians here on the west side of Chicago that they raised me politically for a white man named Donald Trump to come steal me away. And they're all like very upset about it. However, again, this is what I know. This is what I was groomed to do. I've been working in politics since I was 11 years old. My first job was working for Barack Obama and Governor Blagojevich down in Springfield as a high school intern. So this is my world. And I look at these things through a policy lens. So yes, we definitely I have ambition to definitely get into the government. However, I will never, ever, 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 ever run against my congressman. That's a very personal relationship that I value a lot. We are also building our own slates through civic education, because people have to understand how the government functions here. For instance, we have women here who go to City Hall pretty often, and they're talking about their properties. And so as we're talking to people, we're telling them, well, the property issue is a county issue, not a city issue. Or if you are having issues with your child's education, you can go down and talk to the state through the Illinois Board of Education. So we have to map out how these different layers of government function here in Chicago or in Illinois, because we have over 100 layers of government here. It's all bureaucracy. So the goal is to be the education.
If your movement continues, because you're really in a great flow with this movement, you could oust people from office. You can elect people. That's real power. That's how you make change. If you don't like what you have, then change it to what you want to move towards the progress that people have been praying and dying for, actually.
You know, I love it too that she evoked Congressman Danny Davis, who I know very well, coming from Chicago. And what I respect of you is your respecting your elder and respecting who gave you the tutelage to be in the seat where you are now. I would be sort of like eager to hear what he says about it, but he didn't snatch you, the people, they didn't snatch you for Trump, they snatched you for the community.
Listen, this is not even about Trump,
no,
it's not about the Democrats, it's about what works for people. Government has not worked for them for a very long time, and P. Rae wants government to work. It wants government to be accountable and responsible, to make sure the kids are educated, make sure they don't live in fear in their communities because of crime and drugs, that some kids having some heart attack and dying at a young age. It's because you care. What you're talking about is just common sense. The reason why Donald Trump was re-elected to president again. Thank you. We're going to have you back. We're going to follow you. We're going to track you. And we wish you well, and you and our prayers. Marcia, thank you. I want to thank Sam and our earlier guest, Mr. Operative, and Mr. Macbeth for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.